Welcome, welcome everyone to How Personal Should Personal Finance Be? My name is Nicole Newlin. I'm a member of the leadership team of NYC FinTech Women. And I couldn't be more excited to be working together to present this panel to you. Samantha Azzarello is our global market strategist at JPMC, who's going to moderate the event. And we've got an incredible group of women ready to share their stories. When I think about women and how we support each other, I think a lot about finances and just general money conversations that no one really likes to have. But the mission of NYC FinTech Women is to really connect, promote, and empower women. So I think that when you get a diverse group together like this, who are willing to share their stories and talk about money, I think that's true empowerment to me. So I'm so excited about this. And I'm not going to take up any more time. And Sam, over to you.
Hey, thank you, Nicole. Hello to everyone. So glad you're here right now. We've got a great panel. We're going to have some really good discussion. And we're also going to leave lots of time at the end for Q&A. So get your questions and answers ready. Put them in the chat box below at any time, and we're going to get to them at the end. So all of our amazing panelists are going to introduce themselves as we go. You're going to hear some of their stories, some of their background. We're going to have lots of tips, lots of discussion. So to start, I want to turn it over to Laura. Laura's really interesting, and the reason I want to start with her is we're going to talk about budgeting and expensing and all that good stuff. And Laura is a good example of this because she's in transition. She does a lot of work for New York City Women in FinTech in marketing and social, but she's also a founder with an amazing initiative happening in Brazil. So I'm going to turn it to Laura, talk about her story, and then we'll get into spending.
Thank you, Sam. I wanted to start, of course, by thanking New York City FinTech Women for promoting this discussion, this real conversation about money. Like Nicole said, it's very important that we have these honest conversations with each other to empower each other. I wanted to thank JP Morgan and Sam for being here and promoting this event with us. My panelists here for sharing your story, talented and diverse women. It's an honor to be here with you. So a little bit about myself, I'll tell you a little bit about my story, my background, how I grew up, where I grew up, and then we discuss what happens with money today for me, right? So it gives you a good view. Because our behaviors, they come from of us when the moment that we were growing up, right? So I am from Brazil, born and raised in Brazil, from the countryside, a tiny, tiny town that I don't think that even Brazilians will know the name, 10,000 people. And my parents, I grew up in this very small community. My parents, and when you grow up in a country like Brazil, an emerging country that has so much fluctuation with money, with inflation and so on, in our history that stays with us, right? So for people like my parents and where I come from, the idea of money is saving money is to put the money in under the mattress, right? It's that idea of save the money, put it somewhere you can see it, right? Not necessarily it's very reliable to be with a bank. And with that, I grew up, and then I had a global experience, travel around, lived in London, lived in New York City now for almost 10 years, had an MBA, educated, right? And then started working for a bank as my first job outside school with a 6-figure job of a salary. Oh my God, that little girl all of a sudden is all the way there, right? And guess what? We think that we know that we have an MBA, that we understand all financial tools and investment, but still that behavior of growing up stayed with me. And in my case, when I see that lump of money, oh, a bonus, right? Especially because my mind calculates multiplying what I make in dollars in Brazilian reais in terms of currency. So those numbers get bigger and bigger. And my feeling at that point was to, okay, I don't know how to invest. I don't know how to do this. So I'm gonna put money in a place where I can see it, like my parents taught me. So, and then we put our monies and we seed our monies in the savings account, right? It's there, it's safe. There's security in there. It's not gonna move. And then, but how did I then started learning more about money, even though I had this background in money? which is very contradicting. I learned about tools. I learned about education in the financial space that spoke with me as a woman, that spoke with me, that could understand the intricacies of my upbringing, right? And that could like speak a little bit more closely and make an impact. And I learned about E-Trade when I was working for a firm that gave me options or stocks, right, as part of the compensation package. And I learned about that and I started managing that. And then I started becoming more comfortable. And then there is that teaches us a lot about money. There is Clever Girl Finance, My Money, My Future, and You Invest by JP Morgan Chase as well. That helps with this consumer or this one person view of money, right? And then that's when I started thinking, oh, okay, all of these big financial tools, they sound intimidating to me, but I can do this small. I can use fintech to actually educate myself and then probably make big money decisions, right? And then with that in mind, with the struggles that I found in terms of education and in terms of feeling close and comfortable with my own money, I'm thinking, or I'm developing now a startup with the Brazilian Central Bank that is focused on women, that is focused on empowering women with money and education to allow them to have a better life, a better financial life. And that name is Mara. Right, we're starting now. It's an incubator phase, but I can share more with you in the future about that. But that's basically my story, and just gave you the points and bring up the questions, and I'll do my best to answer.
Okay, wonderful, Laura. Thank you. I actually want to bring in Nirvana because Laura, you said something which resonated, and I'm sure it did for many people. This idea of literacy and like what we think we should know, what we need to know before we start. And Nirvana, when we were doing our prep call, you talked a lot about like the things we sort of, I guess, miss growing up. Like you just don't get them in most households. So I don't know if you want to speak to that idea of like taking power and ownership and learning around finances. In particular when it comes to women and what we can kind of own in this space.
Right, exactly. Just a little bit about my background. So I currently work at Credit Suisse as a global conduct risk reporting and analytics lead. I am a widowed mom to a beautiful 9-year-old who sometimes acts like she's 13, but I probably consider myself now to be, based off of my previous job of being an auditor. I was a Sarbanes-Oxley auditor. That largely taught me about spending money, seeing what people do wrong with their money and making sure I incorporate it myself and implementing risk and control. So I'm very risk adverse, as I like to say. And so when I was growing up, blue collar family, middle class, you know, when it came to money, it was, you know, you sort of just walked up to your parents and you asked for it back in the 80s. It wasn't as much as, oh, let me budget my money and let's walk to the bank and deposit money. So I knew, you know, growing up, I wanted something different for my daughter, especially the lessons learned that, you know, I experienced through life. Really to empower her as a woman to be responsible and accountable. So when she was 4 years old, I signed her up for a 529, and at the same time, I opened up a savings account for her. And through the lessons I learned, I think it was more around physically being able for her to touch the money, to go to a banker and to deposit the money, and fully completing a transaction at a very early age, and understanding that, you know, the concept of money and then saving. And, you know, now she's 9 years old. We review through her account, you know, her getting a lollipop has turned into Roblox money, but she understands the concept of, okay, let's save 50%. You get money from the Tooth Fairy. Let's take half of it and put it in the bank. So now she's, you know, grown to really go through her money and understand the concept of it, and that she should be saving her money and saving it for emergencies and rainy days. And at some point she's going to go to college.
So I absolutely love that, because budgeting and saving are the basics. And I think sometimes they get dismissed because they seem a little bit boring. Like, if I had to be honest, because investing is sexy, and like talking about stocks is, exciting because it's fun, and that's how you grow your wealth. But I guess I want to pose to anybody on the group who wants to take this. Does anybody here budget? Is there a dashboard you kind of like, or maybe an app? Do we do any sort of budgeting? I'm just curious, because I think budgeting seems kind of like 1950s, but I've realized it's been modernized, and there's a lot of really cool apps in terms of how we can do it easier. Anybody can take it, the question.
Yeah, so I don't mind starting. I do budget. I think it's really important to develop smart budgeting habits early on. And so, even when I was younger, I was lucky that my parents instilled that in me. And then when I went to college, and now that I'm working in my first job, I have prioritized budgeting. So I actually use an app called Mint. It just helps me track how and where I'm spending my money. It also analyzes where I spend the most money per week. Am I spending it on groceries, eating out, a gym membership, etc. So yeah, I think finding out where I spend my money has really helped me make changes to my habits and set limits if needed.
So what Shloka mentioned around Mint, right? That's a really popular form of budgeting. People always complain about like the connectivity. I've heard that, and it like not categorizing things correctly, but that to me, it's like a really standard, very traditional, fantastic way to budget. Like almost every dollar is given a job. But what I want to just like throw out to the group, like a task or a to-do, there's two numbers that I personally think everyone should know off the top of their head. The first is going to be money you bring in every single month after tax take-home pay. You should know that number cold. I don't like saying should around this stuff because there's a lot of bandwidth, but that's a number I really feel like everyone should know. And then the other around budgeting light is going to be, what do you spend in a given month? And I know that seems like a simple question, but I realized a while ago, I was like, I don't actually know what that number is. And one piece of your monthly spend is going to be your fixed expenses. I call them your ride or die expenses. Like, you should know what those are cold, that number. And then a variable piece. And that's kind of like budgeting light. And then I love the idea, as Shloka mentioned, getting into Mint, getting into an app, of some kind to do it a little bit more granular. But I just wanted to like drop that on the group. Turning to savings, I want to talk to Kristen because Kristen has all these like cool, awesome, fun life events coming up that involve saving. So Kristen, do you want to introduce yourself to the group and talk about that?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Sam. And very similar to Laura, just wanted to first just pause and extend a thank you to the entire New York FinTech Women Committee. So Nicole, Sasha, Michelle, Sam, yourself, as well as the moderator today. Really excited to kind of participate in this conversation, and more importantly, continue to build connections with, members in this community. So really excited today. And then, yeah, as a brief intro to myself. So I lead the implementation team at a startup called Plaid, where we essentially as a company allow end users to link their bank accounts to a lot of the financial technology applications that are in the space today. So Stash, a big example is if anyone has a Venmo account, you might be familiar, with kind of how Plaid plays a role in that. Sam, to your point, to kind of dig into, my personal financial story, to date, I would call myself kind of just the status quo kind of investor, saving every month, investing every month, have a solid relationship with my financial advisor, and we meet quarterly and do check-ins and things like that. And I feel like also to date, all of the, life events, it's just kind of been like year by year, financial events that take place. And I've, been able to kind of like successfully navigate those based upon, my practices to date. A little bit more about myself, I'm reaching my mid-30s. So I feel like kind of different than, the to date kind of trajectory of just, every year, certain events coming up. I'm coming now into, I would say, many more life events kind of in a more condensed period of time. So a little bit more about that. I previously got engaged last year to a wonderful fiance. And we've started that wedding planning process, obviously COVID aside, because that takes the conversation in a whole other direction. But then, an immediate follow-up of that we've also started to talk about is, being in New York City and perhaps trying to get out from under, just the constant renter of, property and things like that. And, starting to tap into figuring out where we're going to lay down roots and perhaps start looking into and investing in, an actual property, that can, be an asset to us. And then, the other milestone, when we kind of think about like the next 2 to 5 years for my specific situation is, coming into, family planning and, thinking about, child, like starting a family and, having a child and then, how that fits into, our financial picture. My fiance and I, we don't have any, relatives nearby, for that type of support, so then, the conversation and the planning comes around, what that support looks like in terms of childcare and what type of costs, that looks like perhaps like in this Manhattan area, which, is an expense of itself. So I would say, I think in summary, one of the main things that stood out to me about this conversation today is, just having that real conversation in terms of like real events, that do happen. And, in my situation, I feel like in these next 3 years, there's quite a few that, I'm planning and balancing and, trying to actively, participate and plan for. And I think one of the things that, in terms of saving that's helped me out particularly is just being open and having a conversation about it and not being afraid to kind of reprioritize things. Thinking about, wedding planning right now with COVID, maybe that turns into a scenario where, we do something small and intimate and then plan, for like a 5-year wedding anniversary of the full, shebang. Where, that then puts the, the wedding perhaps number 3 in line and, with, the assets and, the money that then frees up, maybe first in line then comes, investing in a property. So I feel like that's, kind of been one thing that's worked for me in terms of just being open, obviously, thinking 2 to 3 steps ahead, but also being flexible in terms of, perhaps reprioritizing some of these life events and milestones.
So what you've described, I think is really interesting because it's what a lot of people in like, we don't even have to put an age around it, but let's say like early to mid 30s go through when you suddenly have things where you're like, I need to be organized in order to make that happen. Like I'm going to have to kind of plan ahead. So I want to talk to Shloka about balancing a little bit around debt when we're balancing it with other financial goals. But I want to just shout out very quickly to like a very underused tool. And Laura was mentioning tools also earlier. The savings calculator, right? NerdWallet, Bankrate, they've all got the savings calculators online that help you back out basically how much you would need to save per month to get to a goal. And I think sometimes we don't necessarily think that way. We just focus on auto saving. And I want to ask about savings habits of this group. But I think sometimes you can start with the end goal and then like reverse engineer. So thinking for Kristen out loud, right? Buying a property in amazing New York City. Let's never bet against New York for the record. I know we're kind of going through a tough spot right now, but New York's going to get through this. But thinking through, what would you need for a down payment, doing the research, and then kind of like backing it out from that way, you break it down into maybe it's a 3 to 5 year goal monthly. I know we're going to do some follow-up, so I definitely want to send out one of those because I think it's really underutilized. And I just want to ask Laura really quickly, because Laura, you were talking about the way you grew up around saving and kind of prioritizing savings. What do you do with your savings in the sense of, do you auto save money? Are you very deliberate about it? Is there strategy, or do you just kind of save whatever's left over?
Well, since this is a very honest conversation, I will be 100% transparent with you. I am not working at the time, so I'm not generating per se any income, right? So the parameters, they change a little bit when you are not working, right? Simply with the behavior of not working now and investing in a company that might be an opportunity in the future, right, has definitely shifted the way I behave around money. Before, when I was working and then you have this steady income coming in, and there is no startup for you to invest on. I used to set up an amount, right, of every month, and especially I also have a dog that is my, that will inherit all my legacy and my assets, that I wanted to make sure that he's covered and that my family is covered and everybody else is covered in this idea as well. So in this case now, that is not applicable, right? So instead of sitting, and it's definitely something for us to discuss here, and I want to ask the panel as well. When we are in this situation, right? Lots of people depend on us financially, my family in Brazil, and my business now in Brazil, and there's no income, right? Of course, I use a lot of tools now to prevent me from spending more. I'm not spending that much online anymore. But what do you do in these circumstances when the market is so volatile, especially when we were entering this COVID space, right? February, March, I guess beginning of the year, things started really not looking great. So what I did was to just pause, right? I'm seeing this going down. I'm seeing all of the money that I was investing going down. Let me take a step back and observe now. And that's what I did. So I'm not being very savvy in terms of the investment now because of the risk averse behavior that I have. And because it's kind of a challenge, right? When you don't have any inflow. So that's basically my situation. So if you have any recommendation, and even our attendees as well, as to what's the best way to approach situations like this, I'm all ears.
So I guess what I'm hearing in part is cash, and like we kind of have this weird relationship with it because it feels really comforting. It's like a safety blanket. It feels so good when you see it in the account, but we know we have to invest. We have to, right? Investing our money is the main way that we take our income, which we work really, really hard for, and we transform it and grow it into wealth. So we're going to talk about investing. I would say though, in the current situation, having more cash makes sense, right? Like cash is a buffer. And when times are uncertain, when the range of possible outcomes is very wide, when you think about the economy, job market, and just kind of where we're at in the next 6 months to a year, I do think holding more cash, it does make sense, you know, and we invest over the long run, and there's always time to do that, and you can do both. But given right now, I am a big believer in just holding a bit more cash. I know, Shloka, you had student debt, you also invest, you do both those things. So you introduced yourself a little bit briefly, but tell us your story, more about you. We'd love to hear that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I spoke earlier, but I didn't get the chance to introduce myself. My name is Shloka, and I graduated from Emory University in 2018. I've been a business analyst at Barclays since then, and I focus in both the operational assurance and the risk and control space. And so today I'm just going to be touching upon my financial goals, which are made up of mainly saving and budgeting, like we spoke about earlier, my student loan repayment, and retirement. And so a little early to think about retirement, at least that was the mindset I had going in, and I'll touch upon that later. But in terms of savings, I am, again, risk averse, as some of the other women on this panel are as well. And so I really focus on actively saving money to the point where it's kind of become a habit now. Especially when I first started working, I needed to identify, you know, how much money should I be saving per month? How much should I set aside for like personal expenses, those fixed expenses like we talked about earlier, and how much I could just spend on things that, you know, were meaningful to me or things that made me happy. So I also realize I'm in a bit of a unique position to take this approach to saving because I'm younger. I have no dependents at the moment except myself, and I have fewer responsibilities compared to the other women on this call. And so the way that I approach saving is primarily through like a savings account. I have one with Chase, and I use their auto save program, which helps me set automatic transfers into my savings account and group them by whatever long-term or short-term goals I identify. And so I have one for like a safety net. I have some for like a general savings goal, and then, you know, smaller goals that I think are important. And this is where my student loan repayment kind of comes in. So when I first started paying back my student loans, I initially only paid back the required monthly payment that they they requested. Soon realized that this was just covering the interest and not the principal amount. It was quite a shock when I logged into my account and I saw that that amount had not changed significantly, even after 6 months of paying. And so that's when I used my savings account to create a goal through autosave, specifically for my student loans. So every single week, I set aside a certain amount of money for my student loans, in addition to the normal interest payments that I'm required to do every single month. So this has just helped me chip away, make larger payments every month and chip away at that principal amount. I had some wonderful mentors in college who were really passionate about personal finance. And the one thing they really ingrained into me was that your main priority, especially when you're younger, is to work really hard to pay off like any debt that you have, not to like, you know, have it grow or let it hang over your head. And so that's kind of been one of the basic tenets of my personal finance philosophy, you know, since I've started working. And then recently, this is just something that I'm considering that I thought might be interesting to the group. I have been looking into taking a loan from my 401k, because I've been contributing to that every single year, in order to pay off this full amount and, you know, be done with it and just pay myself the interest. So again, also open to feedback from the participants to see if they have any thoughts on that. And then in regards to retirement, my approach to this is also to start when I'm young. When I first started working at Barclays, I attended a retirement presentation, and they basically said that if you put money into your retirement account in the first 10 years of your career, and then you don't contribute as much in the years after, it will still grow larger than someone who only contributes in the 10 years before they retire. And so that was a huge thing and a really cool thing that I learned in that presentation. And whenever I, you know, see the money leave my account at the end of the month, I don't feel as bad, because I know that due to compounding interest, it'll really pay off in the future. And that's why I place such an emphasis on it. Yeah. And so in regards to the future and planning for that, I'm planning for retirement, because the future is kind of unknown for me. I know what I'm doing in the next 2 years, the next 5 years, but really past that, I don't know where I'll be. And because of that, I am just doing as much as I can right now to prepare and hope that it will pay off in the future. I also have a 401k and a Roth 401k, which I contribute to equally. And I'm also lucky enough that my employer contributes as well to those accounts. So yeah. That's pretty much it for me. I do have my, a Roth IRA as well, and so I invest that money as well as the money in my 401k.
I love how passionate you are about retirement. I'm like, we're never retiring. No one's ever retiring is like how I see this. I'm kidding. We hopefully will. But you know, I love the passion around the retirement. Quick shout out to the Roth and the regular 401k. Such a good move, such a good move. To everyone who's on the panel and who's listening, if you have a Roth option, check it out. Really quickly, because I want to go to Nirvana. I want her take on all of this and how she balances different goals. Hear her story. Around the Roth, why would you maybe want to use a Roth now, whether it's an IRA? If you hit the income limit, if you're under the income limit, go for it. And then if you have a 401k Roth option, take it. And the reason is you pay the tax now, get it out of the way, you get it done, and then you don't have to worry about taxes in the future. Why would you want to pay taxes now? Well, one, if you thought taxes were going up, which they probably are. And also if you thought you were going to be making more money in the future and in a higher tax bracket because you're making more, you'd probably want to pay the taxes now and get it out of the way. So just take a look at that if you can. We'll send some stuff around too. But Nirvana, I want to hear from you because I know you've lived a lot of life and I think there's a lot we can learn from you.
Just a little. I did want to mention to Shloka, so was in the same predicament with my student loans. I went ahead, I consolidated all of my student loans. I got the interest rate. I have a fixed 3.3% interest rate on my student loans. The biggest benefit that I had seen though, in keeping it on the books, as I call it, is that it benefits my credit. So in keeping, just my general credit card open, I have one, and then I have my student loans, and it shows a really long history. So on my credit report, it shows that I've had it for, 15, maybe more years. I don't give my age away. But it's the steady that's on my credit report right now. And I recently realized that it was probably as much of a benefit to keep it open. And also too, because I was able to get a really great interest rate on it. Going into a little bit more about my background. So I probably have lived a lot in my young years. Just relatively speaking about, couples finances. So my late husband owned his own startup, and I was pretty much working at banks, I think, throughout my career. So we've always had this dynamic of, he, had a fluctuating, I want to say, salary, and I've always had more of a stable salary. I always brought home the same amount paycheck every 2 weeks. And really, I think, owning a startup, there's a lot of risk that's involved. I could never do it. And that's why I just work at a bank. But, there's a lot of factors that come into play. He was HR, he was accounts receivable, he's accounts payable, when there's a small organization. What I had experienced is, you have to pick and choose how, you're going to spend your money at a startup. And a part of that was, benefits. And so I'm of the opinion that I go into a company, and I'm very lucky because Credit Suisse is very generous with their employees. And I just mark the box. When the benefits come up every year, I sit down day one, I pick out my benefits, and I make sure I have them. When it comes to a startup, you really have to think through what are those benefits: long-term disability, life insurance. And I unfortunately experienced, at the loss of my husband suddenly, I think as we talked about finances as a couple, everyone's kind of immortal. You don't think it can happen to you. My experience has been, I have 2 parents that are also deceased. So I learned a lot about preparing for loss. And they were both very, very, very young. My mother was 38 when she passed away. And so I, also experienced a loss, with my husband, and here it was. He, unfortunately didn't have life insurance. There was no will. Here you're trying to put together the pieces of this financial situation. And, I even spoke to a friend of mine about, and trying to piece together his business. Because you think about just very simply, passwords to your computer. If you don't have your passwords available, I would go out to the banks, and I would just blindly walk into banks and try to figure out where his accounts were. In planning, I think for, life insurance and continuing on, it's really thinking about your family and thinking about how it is going to impact them. All of our financial decisions really, really impact them. And so now it's, I'm very, very conservative with my finances. It's more cash, is what, was mentioned earlier. And making sure that my daughter is able to pick up the pieces. So, I have a will, I have a living will, and, her receiving any of the life insurance, it's, paced out differently throughout the years. So really just even planning her future. And it's a really hard discussion to have, with anyone. And so, my biggest contribution, I think, to coming and speaking, and I'm very appreciative to have this platform. If one person walks away and they reassess their will, I'll be grateful. But really, thinking through, do you have life insurance? How does it play in the part? And, how is it distributed? Your will, like even, going down and funerals are very costly in New York City. How does that come into play, and how you have to budget, you have to budget when you leave as well as when you're here. So that's my story in regards to how and where I am. And really my life kind of revolves around my daughter. So most of my financial planning. I budget now. I use, like Shloka, I use Quicken now, and I have Excel spreadsheets that I download. And I really have just kind of planned. I feel like now I got to plan her wedding after listening to Kristen a bit. So I feel like I need a savings account for her wedding right now. But, you know, really just making sure I'm prepared for her. So I kind of just, you know, set my life around her, making sure that, you know, and, you know, Lord forbid anything happens to me, she's set and ready to go.
So I want to spend a minute on this, on Nirvana's story, because I think it's unbelievably important. All of these things, right, hit us very viscerally in the stomach. No one ever wants to talk about their significant other dying, right, or their husband, or, you know, dare I say divorce, right, the D word. And so it's not about being cynical, but we always have to be kind of prepared. And we've come a long way. I really know we've come a long way where there's a lot of co-growth and co-coordination between couples and their finances. But this was something that the entire panel, when we were doing the prep, felt very strongly about, that taking the ownership, right, whether it be for our retirement or our savings or the events in our lives, all the way up to estate planning. So I really want to quickly just go over some order of operations, because I feel like it can sometimes get muddled. And where we always start is some form of budgeting, some form of knowing what's coming in versus what's going out. From there, we're going to be setting up a rainy day fund, a cash buffer, right? And that is the money that we need in an emergency. It's to fall back on. It's ours, right? And you could be keeping that in a high interest savings account. We don't have to have that invested. From there, we're probably going to organize our accounts. Shloka referred to that. I love it. Like, have your accounts, nickname them, keep them separate. And once we've done all that, we can really feel good starting to invest, which is the next topic we're getting into. And then I would say the last piece after investing is insurance, wills, and it's obviously going to be where you are in your time horizon and where you are in your life, but I could not agree. And we were all nodding our heads during all of this, like, no one thinks about insurance. Nobody thinks about a will. Like, even the word will creeps me out, if I had to be very honest. Like, it's just one of those things, you know, it doesn't feel particularly good to think about, but we have to do it because this is all the estate piece and the legacy piece. So like Nirvana said, if you could have gotten anything out of this entire thing, it's thinking through that piece at the end, which I call protect, if I had to think of it as a bucket. Turning to investing, I'm going to just actually pose this to the entire group, so whoever wants to take this one. Okay, so we're investing in retirement accounts. Are we investing in any taxable brokerage accounts, whether it be a micro investing app or like an online platform? Are we doing any of that consistently? Do we want to do more of that?
I can take on that.
Okay.
Yeah, I've been loving, this is not a paid partnership at all, but I've been loving the interface with Stash. It's been like working my muscles, my investment muscles, getting me more comfortable. So I'm actively doing that. And also I like the way trade does its things. Do have a 401k as well, which I do not feel confident of moving anything or making any decision as of now. Also the scenario, the future scenario sounds a little bit volatile to make any decisions, but smaller investments, definitely I've been loving the work that Stash is doing. Also, Shloka mentioned Mint in terms of budgeting in the past, and that's also a tool that I use.
Nirvana, did you want to add something around investing?
For investing, I only invest in the 401k that I have. I'm very apprehensive to invest just because of any conflicts with my company. And making sure that I'm compliant with policies. I feel like it's a lot of maintenance from what I have seen, just, you know, being compliant with holding periods and, you know, restricted list. So I kind of just stick to what Credit Suisse has to offer, and that's usually it.
No, and that's helpful because that's going to be very relevant to anyone who's maybe directly in financial services, who's on the panel. Shloka, did you want to mention anything around investing?
When I first started investing in college, it was obviously smaller amounts, and I used Robinhood. I'm a big fan of these digital platforms, as you guys can tell. But now I also have a similar problem to Nirvana, where there are just a lot of hoops to jump through. So I primarily focus on just investing in retirement accounts.
And Kristen, I know you're getting ready for your big goals. When you think about getting ready to purchase a home, you know, whether that be in 3 to 5 years, is investing, do you think, is it going to be a piece of it? Do you want it to be a piece of it? How are you thinking through that?
Yeah, good question. So it's currently not a piece of my plan so far, but very similar to, you know, Nirvana and Shloka. I'm currently only focused in, you know, the I guess allocation that's present kind of in my 401k that I actively participate in. It has been a discussion though that I've started with my financial planner in preparation, and given, you know, kind of the 2 to 3 timeline that I do have where, you know, you could potentially see returns and gains, et cetera. So not actively, but it is a conversation that I've started and that I probably would consider.
Okay. So Kristen brings up a really good point about time horizon when we think about stocks. So retirement feels like it's very far away, and it is. So we can feel comfortable investing it and literally just leaving it be, letting it grow, let it do its thing while we're sleeping. When I think about investing in a taxable brokerage account for shorter run goals, the rule really is 3 to 5 years. Like if you're going to need that money in less than 3 years, I would not be investing it. I would keep it in a high interest savings account, a CD, a cash account, you know, whatever you like. 3 years to 5 is like this gray area where it probably could have worked out because you generally see returns over 3 to 5 years. But if you have 5 or more, we should really feel comfortable around investing. And when I say investing, I just want to caveat this asterisk really quick. I'm not talking about day trading. I'm not talking about buying single name stocks. Like I'm not talking about any sort of fancy footwork. I'm really talking about auto sending every single month a bit of my paycheck into a robo-advisor or with an advisor or planner, and do it in a very balanced, diversified way. So we're going to have stocks and we're going to have bonds, and they're going to be married together in that portfolio. I think the media has like commandeered what investing is, and buying single names, it's risky, you know, and it might work. And I find that it's always what guys are like screaming about back when we were all in the office. But, you know, you think about investing for most people, how they grow their wealth, both men and women, it's going to be in a balanced, diversified way, slowly, steadily over time. And embrace the auto transfer, the auto pay, like auto everything. Okay, so this is going to be our last question, and I want the entire group to answer. I'd like you all to share something that you've learned about money in your life. It could be good, it could be bad, but something that you want to share and kind of impart on the group. Shloka, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, I'd love to. I think one of the most important things, I think there's actually 2. So they're quick though. So the first is to maintain a strong credit score. When I got my first credit card in college, it was mainly for the purpose of building credit. And I was so thankful that I did so when I, you know, started to apply to other apply for other credit cards when I started working. So credit score, very important. And then obviously not relying on credit kind of goes hand in hand. And then the other thing is to set clear financial goals and visions for your future, like sit down, figure out what those are going to be, both long and short term, and reach out for advice. Everyone always has advice, which I think is, and that's why we're speaking today, right? To like see what other women are doing and to open up that conversation. But going in hand with that is also remembering that finances are personal at the end of the day. So what may be worth it to me or to you won't be worth it to the next person. And so just, you know, assessing whatever advice you get against your own situation and goals.
I love that. Laura, what would you say?
I guess my experience, and I guess many of us, money, there were some moments that money was painful, right? But relationship that we have with money can be more than painful. If you embrace your responsibility over that, and if you take the steps to learn at least a little bit, at least taking small steps to understand that money is a tool, it's not a weapon, right? that's what we're trying to do. So that's my lesson with credit. And I also wanted to say that Shloka's point on credit scores is definitely a must.
So let's all go check our credit scores after this. Kristen, I'm going to turn it to you.
Yeah, I would definitely +1 to Shloka in terms of just leveraging your network, leveraging your circle of friends, asking them, you know, gut checking different, you know, financial situations that you find yourself in, and, you know, just being open and honest. And yeah, to her point, you know, having the conversation and being open and having that, you know, like we're doing today. And then I think the second thing that's really kind of been imparted on me is paying yourself first is something that I feel like has really resonated with me and has, you know, now become a habit and emotion that, you know, I just can't get away from. You know, when your paycheck hits your bank account, pay yourself first, just automatically. Sam, to your point, like make it auto so you don't even have to think about it. But, you know, just figure out what you want to move aside for yourself for whatever purpose of the account may be. But it's very important. It just completely eliminates the need of, you know, perhaps, you know, spending on something that you shouldn't have spent, because even if that happens, then you've already paid yourself first. So it's just a good tactic that I think has really resonated with me that I've stuck with.
Okay, absolutely love that. Pay yourself first, take care of future you. Nirvana, we'll end with you.
I think primarily, you know, hope for the best, but plan for the worst. You know, I'm constantly thinking budgeting. I suggest people to download tools. They're a lot of fun, and maybe it's just I'm a data analyst, so I like to play with the charts. But really pushing yourself. And I feel that COVID was probably the largest example of our spending. Like, how many of you have gone through your expenses and said, I drink that much Starbucks in a year, you know, and thinking about the thousands of dollars that you pump through. I mean, my savings has gone from 15% to about 25 to 30% a month based off of, you know, eating at home. Not to say we shouldn't be supporting the vendors out there, but you know, I really think that people should challenge themselves and push the envelope to how much can you save, you know, and really just prepare for that emergency. You know, in my case, I've had emergencies. So I really now just have a big lesson learned. And, you know, I feel that it's, you know, really helped out to save. And I've seen it over the past couple of years where, you know, if I need, you know, something urgently, I'm able to just dip into my savings and grab it really quickly. So,
I mean, so good, so good. I think we all need to kind of reframe our mindset around savings. Savings isn't a restriction or a constraint. Savings is freedom and choice and flexibility, which is all the good stuff, all the good stuff. We're going to take your Q&A now. Larissa, you're going to help us with that?
Hi, can you hear me? Just want to make sure.
Yes.
Okay, hi. First off, thank you everyone. It's been very knowledgeable and I really appreciate how candid you all have been with your financial planning. My question is directed to Kristen. You mentioned earlier that you have a financial planner or advisor, and that's actually one of my next goals. I'm looking to start fully saving and focusing on saving to buy a house. And I was considering looking into doing it with a financial advisor possibly to help me. Do you have any tips on how to go about selecting the correct financial advisor, what you did as far as scouting for one?
Yeah, definitely. Great question. And to be clear, like I'm only through, this will be my second financial advisor who I have the relationship with to date. I've only, you know, been through two. But I would say my general advice is to leverage your network. One thing that I did is I reached out to a few good girlfriends who I know were also investing and kind of tapped into who they were using or what companies or what was their feedback or thoughts. And then the second one that I kind of took as a lessons learned from my first one is what's very important to me is that connectivity and communication and that relationship. My first financial advisor, it felt very just tactical. and kind of robotic, if you will, in terms of just our touch points and, you know, us like getting on the phone together and talking through things. It just felt very, it didn't feel very, you know, kind of just fluid. So that was one kind of lesson that I took away from my first one that I wanted to make sure, you know, was kind of a characteristic of my next financial advisor relationship, who I'm currently with today. So, you know, she has my cell phone number. You know, when COVID hit, I didn't even have to tap into her. She completely tapped me. She texted my phone at 8 o'clock one night and was like, hey, let's get on the phone in the morning. I want to talk you through what I'm thinking about. So those would be my two. I would totally leverage your network and see if any of your friends, you know, have good recommendations. And then specifically to me, that connectivity and that relationship and communication were very important.
Thank you.
Perfect. And up next, we have Joanna.
Hi, thank you so much for everyone taking the time to share your insights and experiences with us. I actually used to work at BlackRock, which was a top asset manager. Worked there for about 5 years and now have transitioned to the startup world where we may not have the benefits that we did within financial compensation and retirement packages. So I'm left wondering, if you are working with an employer that may not match your 401k or doesn't seem as favorable, how do you go about thinking about your retirement plans, whether within a 401k or different brokerage accounts? Just curious to know your take on how to go through that research process and kind of determine what's the most favorable option for you.
So I'm happy to take this, and anyone else can jump in as they see fit. You bring up a really good point, because I think we always just say, get the match, get the company match. And that's kind of an easy metric to just sort of do that. And then it can kind of feel like you're left floating in the wind, right? A little bit out in the woods if maybe the match isn't part of the package anymore. So then this is going to come down to guardrails, which is what I like to call it. So saving anywhere from 10 to 20%. And when I say savings, we're talking about investing, paying off debt, and retirement. If you can do that, you're doing like amazingly well. And I know that might not be as specific as maybe you were looking for, but just keeping in mind that if anywhere in that 10% range total of savings and paying off debt, that would be considered, you know, a massive amount of savings. So I can tell you, for most people, they're really thinking they put 3 to 6% away in their 401k. That's the range, at least I've always come across. But like Shloka said earlier, right, there's a lot of advice, there's a lot of, you know, guidelines and frameworks, and you have to find what works for you. But as close as you can come to putting as much as possible in retirement, the max you can put into a 401k a year is, I want to say, $19,600, but I don't know very many people who do that, to be honest. But I think anything along the lines of just ratcheting up your savings to your 401k makes sense. I don't know if that answers your question or if you're looking for something more specific.
That was very helpful. Thank you so much.
Perfect. And our next question is from Amanda.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Amanda. I'm the paid media manager at Trust & Will. Some of you guys we've had conversations around estate planning on the call today. Definitely encourage you to check us out if you're in the need of an estate plan. But my question is around an MBA. So I've been putting more thought into going back to school for my MBA. And this question is for Laura, since she mentioned she actually got her MBA. What are your views on educational debt, and would you say the payoff is worth the investment?
That's a great question, and thank you for that, Amanda. My experience is a little different. I got into a scholarship to do my MBA. Again, I come from Brazil. My parents are blue-collar workers. They were still actively working. Now they're retired. But I don't come from a background that can even apply for a school here in the United States without proof of income, right? As an international student, if you come here and you want to do an MBA, you have to prove to the government that you have that money to back you up right away. In my case, I was lucky because Pace University, where I took my MBA, got me into a scholarship because of my grades, and this is how it happened that Shloka might have that experience with student debt.
Yeah, so I guess mine wasn't as, I didn't really opt in. I didn't really have a choice not to opt into my undergraduate degree. But I think this is a great question because I am also looking into getting a master's, and there's definitely a lot of factors you have to consider. I think for me, what's been helpful in evaluating if a master's is the right move and if the investment is worth it is, seeing what like your opportunities would be after you get that master's. Is it going to place you in a position where you are, able to get a better job, or a job that might pay you more? You'd get a salary increase from that job that would then make it worth it to, go for that master's degree. Assuming that, with that increase in salary, you'd be able to, pay off any loans or student debt that you might incur. So again, I think it's like one of those things that's a personal question. Are you getting a master's just because you think it's the right thing to do? Or are you getting it because you're passionate about it? There are a lot of factors that you have to weigh. But I think the end of the day is, if getting that master's will make you happier or get you a job that will increase your quality of living, then the answer is probably yes, it's worth it. But I don't want to.
I just wanted to finish that thought as well, if I may, with the of course now the MBA experience, right? It is helpful, of course, right? But like Shloka said, it depends on the sweat and equity ratio, right? Like, what are you trying to accomplish? What are your goals? And how are you going to pay this back? But I just wanted to say that I look at you, Shloka, and I wish when I was at your age, I was like more like you. You're definitely an inspiration to all of us here, especially to me. I also wanted to thank Nirvana to share her life experience here and such different and difficult thoughts for us to have on how to plan. Kristen, I'm in love with your idea, and I think you are a wonderful, wonderful woman here to share with us more how you're making a lemonade out of these lemons that COVID is bringing to you in terms of the wedding. How many weddings have we seen canceled here? And my bride friends are literally like in tears every day almost because of this, and you are making the most of it. So thank you so much for bringing that light and sharing our stories.
Perfect. And Nicole's going to wrap up the session for us today.
Wow, I don't even know what to say. This panel was amazing. I swear I laughed, I cried, I had every emotion known to man. I just want to thank you so much for being so transparent. And I think all of you said this perfectly, that talk to your network, open the dialogue, have the conversation, and that's a lot of what NYC FinTech Women is wanting to do. Even in this time of COVID and strangeness, we're trying to find ways to continue to connect. So I thank you so much, and Sam, for you moderating as well. Two things I wanted to mention in September. There is another networking event coming up. It'll be September 1st. It's a networking lunch through our virtual connection and partners. So please pay attention to that. And also in mid-September, we will be participating in Finovate. It'll be a free session for anyone who wants to attend of NYC FinTech Women. We found 3 really powerhouse female principals who are guiding portfolio strategies for VCs. So I think it'll be a very, very interesting conversation. So thanks again, and everyone have a great evening.